Good morning. So today is February 9th, and this is the morning section of LLM4, and we're reviewing augmented 6 chords today, just the spelling of it. And next week we will be doing part writing with the chords. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is just to go through the homework assignment, so we're sure that we know how to do this stuff. All right, so I think I'll send out again, maybe with a new homework assignment, the chart very quickly, just going through it. Looks something like this. For the 4 augmented 6 chords, we start with the Italian, French, Swiss, and the German augmented 6. And this is the bass, the tenor, the alto, the soprano, SATB. We have flat 6 in the bass for all of them. Now, obviously, in real music, this can all be changed around, but as a schematic understanding of how these things work, we have flat 6 in the bass and raised 4 or sharp 4, as we call it, in the soprano. In the tenor, usually scale degree 1. So whatever key we're in, that's the note. For the Italian, that note is doubled. That would be scale degree 2 in both inner voices. Scale degree 2 for the French. Raised 2 for the Swiss augmented. And, flat 3 for the German. This is obviously the same note, but it's spelled differently. And we will see next week, we'll explore why that is, because once we start part writing with this stuff and writing progressions with these chords, will become clear what they are, how similar they really are, and how much of this is derived from melodic, meaning contrapuntal movement in the voices. Actually, all of that that looks as 4 different chords would turn out to be really the same process, in which you have a passing tone that is then later on admitted into the chord itself. That's a process that we'll see repeated over and over and over again. The best example of that is probably the passing 7 in a dominant 7 chord being admitted into the chord, meaning being interpreted as being part of the chord, even if it originally was a passing tone. That is exactly what's going on here as well. Okay, so this one here, take a screenshot of it, print out the sheet that I sent, or write it out yourself. Actually, if you write it out yourself the old-fashioned way, it leaves a bigger imprint on the memory bank. So I'm just going to erase it now. If you want to take a screenshot right now, you can do that. And go forward. Okay, so I'm going to go through all the homework assignments, which is basically just spelling it out right now. And after that, I think we can close this chapter and then start doing different stuff with it. Okay, the first one, I actually had that spelled out already. So I'm going to write up my grand stuff like that. And it said, German augmented 6 chord. All of them are really called in sort of daily parlance 6+. Sometimes you'll see some fancy Roman numeral numbers and some bigger base numbers attached to them. That's fine. We can certainly do that. But everyone calls this particular chord a German augmented 6 chord. And we have a key of C, C major, C minor. It would appear most often in C minor, but you will also see composers who are sort of disregarding normal part writing rules and just using whatever chord they will have in both major. And that's perfectly fine. You know, we're not, you know, the role of music theory, again, is not to teach composers how to write music, but simply just to learn certain skills from composers when they do it really well. For instance, very often you would see Beethoven, for example, just actually spelling the augmented sixth chord when he uses it, and uses it a lot, whichever way that he finds most comfortable. You'll see Chopin, for example, spelling it out like a dominant seven chord. So they're really, you know, the rules of the observations that we are making are not meant to sort of chastise Chopin or Beethoven or Schubert or whatever for spelling their chords wrong. That's not what this is about. It's simply just to say these are observations that we're making. German augmented sixth chord in the key of C would feature flat six, and I'm going to go through it just like we've done before. To find flat six, we go to scale degree 5. In this case, that's G. Half step up, flat six is A flat, because a half step up from G is A flat. Remember to spell it with the next letter name. That's the mistake that people make all the time. That they may say half step up from G is G sharp, and that's sharp 5. It's technically the same pitch as this one here, but that's not flat 6. Sharp 5 is not the same as flat 6, although it's the same pitch, but it's spelled the wrong way, and therefore the direction, you'll see this next week, the direction of the notes when they move is more difficult to read. Okay. So half step down from G would be F sharp. Again, spelled with the letter name right before G. 4, 5, 6. It really is simple. Goes in here, A flat. So flat 6 goes in here. F sharp goes up here. And then scale degree 1 would be C. And scale degree flat 3 in the key of C would be 3 up from C, and then it has to be a minor third, and there'll be E flat. So here you see chromatic inflections where you have both flats and sharps in the same chord. That's an unusual thing to do, and something that you only do when you've sort of exhausted all the regular ways of doing it. But we can see, of course, that if I had spelled this as a G flat, then I would have an A flat dominant 7 chord. So therefore, this chord works in the key of D flat, but it also works in the key of C. That's why they're called chromatic harmonies. The correct spelling for the augmented.
I have a question. I'm sorry. The E flat. I'm kind of confused about the E flat and the alto. Wouldn't it be E natural? Or...
So that would be a major third above C. So if I spell this as E natural, right? You would have, I mean, so it's flat 3, right? I mean, I know you came in late, but flat 3 in C is a minor third above 1. Just think of it that way. Flat 3, don't think that it has to be spelled with a flat. In this case, it actually is spelled with a flat. So that's very convenient. And that's why I'm starting out with this one here and giving you that as an example of where everything works out in a logical way. You know, flat 6 is in fact spelled with a flat, sharp 4 is spelled with a sharp, etc., etc., etc. And flat 3 is in fact spelled with a flat. Well, why would you spell it with a natural, as an E natural? I'm just curious. I mean, you know, Calvin, why would that be?
I'm just thinking like in terms of like position on like we're in C, and then I'm thinking like in position on like the piano.
Well, the piano is a representation of the notes, right? So the piano or not, it doesn't really matter if you're playing it on saxophone or piano, whatever. But you have to think of C as C major and C minor. In this case, it's C minor because do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to have that in your mind that when we talk about the key of C, I know that regular theory programs they separate major and minor in a very sort of forceful way and treat them as something separate. We don't do that here for two reasons. First of all, gospel music behaves very much like what we call secondary modal mixture, that the key of C is both the key of C major and C minor in gospel music. So that's one very good reason, a sort of reason of practicality, that most of the sounds you will hear in both jazz but particularly in gospel music would be the blended sounds of the tonal possibilities of both C major and C minor at the same time. Jazz is more modally oriented. A jazz guy would say, oh, we don't use the minor mode. We use the Aeolian mode, which is the same thing. So, I mean, they may call things by different names, or they'll say, oh, it's certainly not minor, it's Dorian, right? Which is also really the same thing. You can have a minor mode with a raised 6th scale degree, and if you don't raise the 7th scale degree at the same time, then you would have Dorian. But the procedures really at the bottom end of the scale is the same. So if you see, let me explain that a little bit further. If I write out the C major scale, right, that we only need to go up to the 5th scale degree, but that's all we need for this. That would be C major, yeah? This would be C minor. It's very easy, actually. So natural 3, like that, we don't have to specify that really, because it's understood that if it's not flat, then it's natural, right? There's only really 2 possibilities there. This is C major, and this is C minor. So when I say flat 3, or when people, I mean, music theory guys, when you, let's say, our aim is to send all of you guys to Manhattan School of Music to do grad studies, right? I mean, you may not want to go to Manhattan School of Music, but I'm saying that that's a case, for instance, where all the people teaching music theory, they would understand flat 3 to be E flat in the key of C. It would simply just be a minor third above the tonic. Yeah?
Oh yeah, I get it now. Yeah, I get it now. I'm sorry. I get confused with because I didn't know it was minor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what it means. and I know it's confusing. I really do. And I know I correct people for saying flat means minor. It doesn't. But in certain cases, it kind of does. In this case, it actually does. And I understand the confusion. The confusion very often is that students, when they enter, for instance, they'll come to me in the past. Now they, it doesn't happen the same way in COVID times, but they will come to me and say, I don't need music fundamentals. That was back in the day when there was a separate course that we actually had to sort of sneak in under the radar. Don't get me to talk about that, because that's a long and very boring discussion. But we had to sort of give people a class that was called basic music. It carried no credits, but that was a sort of primer course, because otherwise people couldn't enter the theory track. And I had a lot of students coming to me because they didn't want to take the course because it carried 0 credits, and they started to pay for it. That I can't explain why that is, but it bees, right? So very often I have students in my office saying to me, I don't need music fundamentals because I know that flat means minor and sharp means major. And I say, well, explain C sharp minor then. Because that theory sort of goes out the window, but in a certain restricted sense, it actually, there is something about the language of sharps, raised notes, and notes that have been lowered, that they are understood also in certain contexts to be major and minor. Right? I mean, like here, for instance, this is a minor third, because it's a whole step and a half step up from D. This is a major third because it's two whole steps up from D. And so this one does mean major, and this one, you know, natural means minor in that sense. And oops, hold on a second. That went totally wrong. And if we're in or on the note of C, then this one here means major, yeah? And this one here means minor. So this one here would be, we would actually indicate that as this particular note here in the key of C would be natural 3 or major 3, and this one here would be flat 3.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
I just wish they indicated it, like if it's C minor, just put C minor. That's my preference.
No, I understand that. And if I did that, you know, then still flat 3 would still be the same. It's not that you go to the third scale degree in C minor and then flat that. That's not what it means, right? So I want to be clear on that. But it's also, I think you'll find as we move forward that the confusion is actually productive in a way, because this, when we're not really indicating whether it's C major or C minor, that opens up the door for understanding gospel straight out of the box. You already have that, because I think I highlighted that last semester where we did all the predominance, right? That all the predominance that you would expect really to work in the minor mode, when they're imported into the major mode, they sound actually really good and gospel-y. Let me give you an example. I'm not going to switch everything around, but it is a very, very good question, Calvin. So I'm just going to open up my pianoforte, which is not my instrument really at all. But so if I have here the key of G, right? You know, and if I have this chord here, that we would understand that to be a very gospel kind of sound. That's actually one of it's a gospel kit. So make use of these two chords here, right? But this sound in and of itself, we would sort of expect that to work. To work in the minor mode, and when it's imported into the major mode, it just sounds gospel-y, right? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, thank you for for playing it on the piano. I can hear it now.
Right. So that's kind of what's going on here. That we want to have the major and minor mode sort of mixed in nice and well. No, I mean, it's not only in gospel that happens. I mean, as I just said, I think it was before you came in. Beethoven does the same thing. You know, he would be using this chord here and then go to the major mode, and that's a wonderful thing.
So you just assume that when you're doing these things that major, there's no difference between major and minor. That's the assumption.
Yeah, that's the new assumption. Let's put it that way. The old assumption is that you have to separate the major and the minor mode. You sort of have to treat them as something separate, and that's why in sort of old-fashioned programs, very often you'll see all these different predominants. You remember from last year, we had 7. These are also predominants, by the way. So now you have 11 up there. You have 7 from last year, or from last semester, actually last year as well. But last semester we did 7 sort of common predominants, and now we're adding 4 more. So we have now 11. But right, but the thing that tends to happen in music theory is that it's the predominant group, the group of chords that will prepare the dominant. In other words, the 2 chords. If you're a jazz guy, right, you would feel that your 2 chords keep being, sort of mutating, because they can sound in so many different ways. And that's the great thing. Whereas 5 and 1 is common to all sorts of tones. It doesn't really depend on the style too much. 5 and 1 is okay, that's the closer, sometimes. And in gospel, as you well know, Calvin, you can also go straight. I'm not going to turn the camera around because I think you know what's going on here. You can go straight from this one in and straight to your tonic. That's a blues cadence, right? Or an amen cadence. You use that in the gospel church all the time. You actually don't, as a general rule, you don't use too many 5 chords as such, right? You sort of go the counterclockwise in the circular fifth. I mean, that sounds very technical. I guess it is. But what I'm saying is that you sort of bypass the 5 chord in that. And then we'll think that, okay, this is something new. It's actually something that's much older than tonality itself, because that's how music sounded for 500 years, before sort of tonal music became the norm of Western music. Jazz is actually, in a funny way, more aligned with classical music, because you do have, I mean, if you say the jazz guy, 2-5-1, he would understand as being the sort of standard progression in jazz music, but he would understand the 5 as being essential to that style of music. And that's much more aligned with traditional classical theory, or tonal theory, as you would understand it. Whereas going straight from a predominant to the tonic is what we call a plagal cadence, right? That's an older type of cadence. It has many more years of wear on its sleeves, right? And that's the one that is traditionally used for the blues cadence that you find in gospel music. You also find it very, very, very often in pop music. You go straight from the 2 chords or 1 chord. And then you decorate in various ways. You alter the fifth, you raise different notes, etc. You invert it. The one I just played here was inverted twice, right? So that was in second inversion, what we call a 4-3 chord. Anyway, but that's the explanation for that. Flat 3 simply means minor third. Yeah?
Yeah,
okay.
I get it.
Cool. But great question, right? I mean, it's just that, certain questions require a good answer. I can't just say, well, that's just the way it is. That we're not learning much from that, actually, if anything. So I'm not, I'm going to give as far as I can. I'm going to try to give good answers, right? Okay, so and I know you had, I think, Calvin, you asked me a question about the Swiss augmented 6th chord.
Yeah, I was confused about that one.
That one causes a lot of people to sort of choke a little bit. All right, so
it was F sharp. Yeah, I think F sharp.
Well, let's get to that. It's actually G sharp, but that that is the raised 2nd scale degree. But we'll get to it. It's quite simple, and you'll see what I mean. So the one note that we can add right away. So this is the Swiss, not swish, but Swiss. It's an abbreviation of Switzerland. I don't know why people call it the Swiss augmented 6th chord. There's no particular reason for it. For our purposes, it's quite convenient because an aid to the memory is that the Italian is the one, I think I made this little exploration here that starts with 2 scale degrees, 1 in the inner voices. Then the next country up, if you go from south to north, is the French, where you have 1 in the inner voices takes scale degree 2. Then the next country up, Swiss, if you like, is sharp 2. That's the Swiss augmented, and then flat 3 would be the next sort of country up. So there's a little bit of a trick to this. It's just an aid to the memory. This is just something that I've invented, because then you'll see another theory book that messes up with the order here, and then it's all confusing. I don't know why people tend to do that, but that, there are a lot of things I don't understand. Okay, so the first note that we can actually place without any thought at all is the note F, because that's the first scale degree, right? Whatever key you have, scale degree 1 is the name of that note. And here we can, let's say we put it here, right? I mean, that's just for the sake of starting. We could also, when you start composing this stuff, you can put it in any voice you want. So, but this is pretty much locked in. This is F, yeah? And then you say, okay, I'm going to have sharp 2 or raised 2nd scale degree. Now, the 2nd scale degree in both major and minor would be a whole step up from 1. There's only 2 scales if you're a jazz guy, because then it becomes complicated. They don't operate with major and minor, but they operate with the modes. And there are two modes where you start with a half step. You know, in which case this chord would be slightly off kilter, I guess. You know, but if you work it out from major and minor, let's just say, for the time being, let's just forget about jazz theory in its sort of current form, and say we're going to operate with gospel theory. Gospel is more major and minor. It's also modal, but it's more major and minor than modal. A whole step up from F would be G. So regular 2 is G, yeah? Raised 2 would be G sharp. That it is that simple, really. But you just have to sort of be able to break it down and say, okay, now I place the inner voices, and be sure to add the stems right away, because otherwise, if you're just doing this could be a soprano note, right? You're not really sure until you add that stem. And that means that once you add the stem, you know that nothing in this clef is going to go below this note. This is your lower limit, so to speak. And nothing is going to go above this one, the tenor, because I've added the stem, and because it could have been a bass note as well, right? Okay, so that's how to find raised 2. Pretty easy, because, you know, it's a whole step up from 1, that's 2, and then you raise that with whatever measure. I mean, let's say if you have to remove a flat, because sometimes that's the case. If you're in, let's say you're in a key where the G is flatted, right? Then you remove the flat to raise it. You don't add a sharp necessarily. It's a really, really important point there, that you have to do whatever it takes to raise it by a half step. That's sharp 2, yeah? Let's deal with the 2 altered scale degrees, and we go to scale degree 5 again. 5 is in this key, in the key of F, is C. How do you know that? You just count 5 steps up from S. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm temporarily just switching here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you will find it, no problem. It's like the alphabet, F, G, A, B, C, in which case we understand that after G, we start over with A. Okay, so scale degree 5 is C, and that follows then that flat 6 is D flat. Next letter name up and a half step away from 5, that's flat 6. Sharp 4 would be
E natural.
Yep, E natural, very good, because you'll see it's not B sharp, right? Although we call it sharp 4. This is a wonderful example of the inconsistency in music theory in naming the note and what it actually is, how it's spelled. So you're absolutely right. In the key of F, both F major and F minor, the B would be flat. If you go to Jazzland, you'll have also, oh, no, not if you're playing out the Lydian scale, right? But that has a raised 4 scale degree or sharp 11, because they like to make it more complicated. I honestly think that jazz theory aims to make things as complicated, sounding as complicated as it possibly can. So they'll call this sharp 11, right? And say that's the Lydian scale, man. So, okay, so B natural is the answer to that one. And then flat 6, we already have that. That's D flat. And if you notice, by the way, I don't know if you have it, I don't personally think that this is a good way of working it out. You will see that in the base of all of these organic 6 chords, you'll have a major third. I think if you're a keyboard player, that's probably the only way that I can see that holds some validity, because you sort of know the feel of a major third in your left hand. All right, so that's the answer to that one. You can have the F up here. I mean, this will be easier, by the way, to play, right? So that one, right? Yeah, just like that. Because you now have the 3 upper notes with your right hand, and you just have 1 note for the bass. But either spelling is fine, as long as you have a D flat, an F, a G sharp, and a B natural in that chord. That is a Swiss augmented sixth chord in the key of F. Next week, we will examine why are there two augmented sixth chords that sound exactly the same. You can't hear the difference between the Swiss and the German augmented sixth chords. One works in the key of minor and the other one in major. So it's just a matter of spelling. But I can leave this actually. That would be the, let's say we call this the Nlsa voice, right? Nlsa. That's not clear what that is. Because all the other ones are the same, right? We'll just hang on to this. This is your, if you want to, let's say, if you want to reduce the number of things to keep track of, just say that everything else in all these augmented sixth chords are the same except for one of the inner voices. We just assigned the Nlsa to being the one that sort of travels. In the olden days, that would be called the pilgrim note or the nodus peregrinus. You don't have to remember that. That's just my own nerdy little, it's my nerdy side here. Okay, so the next one is E flat and Italian 6. E flat major, E flat minor. Certainly the major mode is easier in this case because you only have 3 flats to jog. So far, are we good so far? Yeah? Cool. Okay, Italian 6 in the key D flat. Let's go to the 2 altered notes and say scale of B5 is B flat. And again, if you have a problem sort of working this out, just do a major scale. Say whole step up, whole step, half step, and then a whole step. And you'll end up, if you can do that, which all of you can very efficiently, you can find scale of B5. Always revert back to something that you know, because there will be, I promise you, there will be situations where you're going to be so nervous you think you can not even remember your own name to put on your test. And doing well on these entrance tests, they're usually placement tests, right? But doing well on them can mean the difference between paying an extra $10,000 or more, really, for your studies, or so that's a huge monetary reward, and also time-wise, you don't want to do undergraduate theory again when you go to grad school, right? Why would you? You already paid for the course. Show up as you do, guys, right? I mean, I see a full deck of students here, and the evening class is even bigger, so that's good. We have a good full class of undergraduates in this section. It's very, very good. Okay, flat 6. That's a half step up on B flat, spelled to the next letter name, right? Now, we know it's some type of C. We know that because it has to be the next letter name up, but it has to be a half step away from B flat. Now, B flat and C, that's a whole step. So I have to lower this one, and I have to call that C flat, not B, because B natural would be sharp 5. You would only be half wrong if you spell it as B, but it's better to get it right. And you will see that the way it stacks up, and you'll see next week the way the voices are moving, you can see very, very clearly why that is so. This one here, by the way, will move move down, as you can see, because this is the bass, and that will move down. You'll see it next week. It makes more sense when we sort of start to part write this stuff. So sharp 4, that is, we understand that that's some type of A that is a half step away from B flat. Bingo, right there. And we might want to indicate that, because in the key of E flat, major or minor, the A is expected to be flat, and A flat. We just saw that when we wrote out our scale, right? So this is really the calculation that you have to do. For the Italian 6, there is no additional, junk that you have to worry about. All right, so let's place the bass first. It'll be C flat, for instance, here. And let's place the A natural up here. Always do that. Whenever you have the option of placing the bass and then go to the soprano, do the outer voices first, and then place the inner voices. In this case, it's very, very simple because it's scale degrees 1 in both voices. And I understand that that's the same note, and that's fine, you know, but if you spell it like that, everyone would be very happy. And I mean, having School of Music, they'll clap their little hands and say, he doesn't need more theory on the undergraduate level. But this is where people go in the water, right? Because this is the top end, or consider the top end of tonal theory. There's really, in the nuts and bolts of it, there's nothing to it. There really isn't. So that's the answer to that one. That was the third one. Yeah, moving on. Give me thumbs up, virtual or otherwise. Good. D and French. Key of D, scale of B5 is A. So flat 6, I'm just going to blast through because this one is an easy key really, right? I mean, B flat and sharp 4 would be G sharp. Half step below, half step above. B flat here, it could also be up here, but it's all good. And G sharp. Just remember to reverse, you know, I'm doing it this way because it makes more mathematical sense. But just remember that this note here actually goes up here and this note goes down here. But 4, 5, 6 going upward, that keeps the brain really in check. So the French has 1 for one of the inner voices. That'll be D, right? You can always count on that. This is why organic 6 chords are so easy, because one of them will always be scale degree 1. And that's actually when you're analyzing stuff, you want to catch on to, okay, what key am I in? And, or if you're modulating, what key am I going to? And then you'll identify where is that scale degree 1, and then map out what kind of organic 6 chord is. And then everyone is happy. Okay, now if this is 1, then 2 would be a whole step up from here. And that's E. You can work it out like this. 1 is D, so 2 is E, whole step. And sharp 2 would then be E sharp, right? And flat 3 would be 3 letter names up from D, D, E, F, some type of F that is a minor third up from D. Bingo, that's F natural. Easy, right? Now, I know that this is not the way that real series is, because they're making it much more difficult. I don't know why, but they are. And they're doing a whole bunch of analysis that really tends to confuse a lot of people. You know, I'm playing a whole bunch of music that sounds very foreign to a lot of ears. You know, some obscure Borodin quartet in A flat minor or whatever. And then all of a sudden you think it's very difficult. It isn't. Easy peasy. If you know 1, you also know 5. If you know 5, you also know sharp 4. You also know flat 6. If you know 1, you also know 2. And if you know 2, you also know how to raise that one. So, not a big deal, right? C major, minor, German organic 6 chord. Okay, so scale degree 5 is G. So flat 6 then is A flat. And sharp 4 is F sharp. And then let's work out what I think. Oh, we did that one. Oh, that was an A flat. Okay, so we did that one. So let's do it from C. So if 1 is C, 1 is C. That means now that flat 3 is a minor third up from C, or E flat, as Calvin and I did before, right? So keep that sort of separate, you know. So A flat goes down here, and F sharp goes up here, for instance. Then scale degree 1, I'm sorry, is here, and flat 3, which we worked out is E flat, is down here. However you place this, there's actually no mistaking what that is. That it's the E that's flatted and the F that's sharpened. It can't be the other way around. Why is that? Let's say I say, oh, how do you know it's not E sharp and F flat? Because that will be the same note. And F flat is an E, right? And an E sharp is an F. So that makes absolutely no sense. So the context will give it away with notation. So it's actually up to you, however you want to place these accidentals. The trained eye would sort that out right away. Okay, so that's the last one in the first group there. Then we have D flat and Swiss augmented 6. Actually, I can keep all this stuff here, right? I just have different letter names now. All right. So B flat, major, and Swiss augmented 6 chord. Scale degree 5 in B flat is F. If you're unsure about that, just write up your B flat major scale and you'll find that you land on F. If you do whole, half, whole. That's all you need. Half step up from F is not F sharp, but G flat, if it's spelled as flat 6. And raised 4 is a half step down from F, which is E natural. Makes sense because in the key of B flat, major or minor, whether you have 2 flats or 5 flats, because it's one or the other, the E would be an E flat. So therefore we have to indicate that this has been raised. We removed the flat. So 1 is B flat, yeah? What is flat 3 then? Well, let's take this away and say a minor third up from B is D, yeah? Because that's a whole step and a half step. Or if you take it the other way around, from B to C is a half step, and from C to D is a whole step. So from B, it would be D. If I've lowered this one, it would be D flat. So here's an example of raised 4 means that we've removed one of the flats, thereby we are raising the note. Now we have all the notes lined up. Okay? I'm just going to put in here B flat. That's my scale degree 1. And flat 3 would be D flat. That will go in here at the alto. And now E natural, we can see that try to see, when you're notating 2 notes that are clashing, first of all, you don't try to squeeze them in together. That really upsets the eye. You have to see that these are 2 notes that are clashing, right? Try to make them appear like this, as if they have the same stem that's just continued straight through.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
For a Swiss augmented 6, wasn't it a sharp 2?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. Absolutely. So that'll be C sharp, right?
Yeah, that's what I put.
Yeah, sorry. I was in the German augmented 6 mode that we just did right before. That usually happens at night to me. After I've been teaching like 10 hours or something. But absolutely, here, that will be spelled as a C sharp. It would sound the same, right? But this one here would go to major. We'll see how that works out. Okay, so that's, thank you, Kevin. That was Swiss augmented in B flat. And E and French augmented. Okay, so in the key of E, 5 is B, flat 6 would be C natural, and sharp 4 would be A sharp. Leading tone to 5, if you want to call it that, because that's kind of how it functions. And then leading tone, they would both go in opposite direction, in contrary motion. So flat 6 will be C natural. And you want to indicate that. And A sharp would go up here. And scale degree 1 would be E. Let's put it up here. And then French augmented, that will be a whole slip up from E, which is F sharp. Like that. That's your French augmented 6
Professor?
chord. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be C flat, flat 6?
C flat would be the same note as B, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm thinking the other way. Yep.
It's that half step. It catches us out. Actually, and when we're tired, you know, it really catches us out all the time. The other one that catches us out is obviously the E to F sharp or E to F, you know, that half step. And given enough sort of perceived complexity, we, you know, even very experienced musicians will tend to make a mistake with that. So it will be C natural, because remember that in the key, let's say in the key of E major, the C would most definitely be sharp, and very, very often in the minor mode, it's the raised 6th scale degree, you know, the Dorian, if you like, you're a jazz guy, and you want to call it Dorian, then that's kind of what that is. So,
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I just wrote the, what is this? The F, no, the E. I wrote the E like an octave down. Is that incorrect, or is that?
It's okay. I mean, I think I made the point. I mean, given that we have no context for these chords, it's fine. I mean, you can definitely write it down like this, right? It's just that in real life, which we will get to next week, where we're doing this sort of more in the style of writing progressions involving these chords, then we want to have the tenor at a range where they can actually sing and be heard. You know, the problem, the tenor is a complicated voice because there are very few men who can actually sing tenor, or who believe they can sing tenor. All men can actually sing the tenor, because all men can falsetto, so can women, right? But I mean, you know, men in particular have an extra octave or two, or sometimes three, because they can falsetto. But some men are reluctant to do that. So they sing with their quote unquote natural voice. And if you do that, and if you are a tenor, you can only go so far down, in fact. You can't actually sing lower than your vocal cords would allow you to do. Whereas if you have a tenor that is high, it's actually better, because a higher voice naturally projects better.
Okay.
And it blends better, right? So, but these are sort of secondary considerations. For the purpose of spelling, this is as correct as the one I did.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. That goes out. But you understand this, that here, E, F sharp, that's the same sort of dilemma as we have up here. And if you think, just sort of double check yourself, shouldn't it be C flat? It looks like a C flat, but C flat would be the same key, the same pitch as a B. So the music doesn't really care how we spell it. If it's a B, it's a B, no matter if you call it C flat or whatever. And it wouldn't have any impact on the way that we are hearing it. I hope that makes sense, but I mean, you know, it's just a matter of sort of manipulating. Let me write off all these options here. Flat 3. Because that's navigated from 1, and all the other ones are navigated from 5. Hold on to these navigation posts, because they're really important. The reason why 5 is such a good navigation post is A, it's the same in major and minor. B, it's immutable unless it's changed. You know, I mean, if it's altered, then you can't rely on it. But all the other notes are potentially altered, as we see. The fourth scale degree, especially in let's say in non-classical era music, in romantic music, in jazz, in gospel, the fourth scale degree is very, very often altered. Almost always up, actually always up, when you're involving the Lydian mode, etc. 6 is a notoriously unreliable scale degree, because There's a historical reason for that, and we explored actually when we did the predominance last year. Scale degree 5 is consonant with the bass. So is 6. It's just that 6 is not a perfect consonant interval. It's what we call imperfect. That means it must be either major or minor. So it's either the major 6 above the tonic, or it's the minor 6. Both they're equally good. It's not that, and they're both consonant. But this is something that we can see again and again and again is explored in tonal music, that we're expanding the palette really quite considerably. If you think about it, let's take C major. That's an easy key to handle. Flat 6 would be A flat. The C now all of a sudden works as your major third above A flat, and therefore infuses a lot of different color into this. And conversely, if you're staying in C, then let's say you're in C major, then all of a sudden you get 4 flats to play. The 4 flats that are in flat 6 or A flat. And therefore you have a lot of color. And those are the colors that were really exploited in the late 19th century, or really from the mid 19th century and out. That was what eventually led to this very, very complex sort of late romantic music that really is the true heritage, harmonically speaking, of jazz. Jazz, as one of my colleagues who is a jazz, I'm not a jazz musician, but he is, sure. And he said, look, jazz is really the merging of late romantic, complicated harmonies with African rhythms. And I think that's a very, very good understanding. That's his understanding. It's not my understanding of it. But I think that explains a lot. Okay. We did the B flat, right? We did the E. Okay, in G, Italian, augmented 6. Okay, and G, so let's just place scale degrees 1 and 1, right? That's easy in this key. It's also easy in the French, right? Let's just do. So 1 is G, okay, and 5 is D, yeah? Flat 6 would be E flat, and sharp 4 would be C sharp. Now we've got all the notes, right? How about that? C sharp up there. And you can see the tritone here, by the way, right? E flat, easy peasy. So spelling this stuff is very easy, really. You can make mistakes, as we all do. But the spelling of it is easy. That's why I'm starting with this. I want this to be solid. I want everyone to be able to handle this and say, yeah, I can spell a Swiss augmented 6 chord in B flat. We just did that. Okay, so that's the spelling of that. How many has got 100% so far? Close,
On
right?
the homework? On the homework?
Yeah.
I got some wrong.
But I'm just curious. So I mean, you're close to 100%, right?
Yeah, I'm close to it, but I'm not at 100 yet.
Yeah, so that's good. It's not, we're really just asking for competence. Being totally 100%, that's fine, but it's sort of fluff on it, But understand the principles behind it. That is the key. That is really the key right now, because you're going to have a lot of training in this for the remainder of this semester, and then we have another semester next semester, right, where we can choose to loop back and do a whole lot more of this, because semester 5 is the sort of review semester, and whatever topic, let's say we have a class that is completely flying through tonal theory, we can explore a whole bunch of other stuff, right?
Yeah, a quick question. This is like off topic. You said all of these different things that you're teaching us, German, Swiss, these are all predominants, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. F sharp, German amended.
This was
Okay.
the one that I had like problems on.
Yeah, it's probably just a matter of placing the right accidentals, I would say. So, and here's how to break it down. C sharp is scale degree 5 because if in F it is C, which it is, we did F before, then in F sharp, it will just be C sharp. Half step above C sharp is D natural. We would indicate that it's a natural because it's understood that in the key of F sharp, both minor and major, it can, you'll very often find a D sharp in the Dorian mode, if you're a jazzer, or if it's F sharp major, you will definitely find the D sharp all the time. Sharp 4 would be a half step down, so we know it has to be the next letter name down. Look, there's C, D, and then letter name down would be some type of B that is a half step away from C sharp. It would be B sharp. Because this is a half step. From B to C is a half step. So if this one has been raised, we must raise this one too. So let's find scale degree 1. That's easy, right? Scale degree 2 would be G sharp. And then flat 3 would be A. You see that? Because that's a minor third up from F sharp. Scale degree 2 would be G sharp. That's a whole step up. Scale degree sharp 2 would be G sharp sharp, or we call it G double sharp. And flat 3 would be the same pitch as G double sharp, but just spelled with the next letter name up. That is 3 steps away from F. And if this one is sharp, right, then this one here will automatically be a minor third. That's how to work that out. Now we got all the notes, right? We got all the notes here. So flat 6, D natural. Oops. Like that. We would indicate that. Let's say for the purpose of homework next week, if you just write D without anything, I will assume you mean D natural. But so these are called courtesy. In this case, courtesy natural, right? Just to remind the reader, meaning the one who's sight reading it, that this is actually a D natural, not the D you would expect in the key of F sharp. Okay, so that one, and then B sharp. You be confident. Just don't do the translation, what I call the jazz translation. Don't do the jazz translation and say there's no B sharp, that's a C. Again, I want to explain why that is, because it's not that jazz players are wrong saying that that's a C. It's because of the notational history of jazz music, that if you're just reading, or not just, but if you're reading, because it's a practicality, you have all your chords not written out in staff notation necessarily. I mean, if you're doing big band arrangement, sure, you have all your horn arrangements, you got them written out, just like Wagner, right, or Beethoven, Schubert, or whatever. You have all of these things written out. There's no improvisation in those sections of sort of straight horn arrangements or whatever. And you can verify that by just going to any of the rehearsals in Jazz at Lincoln Center, for instance. The conductor there has a full score where everything is written out. There are certain sections where you're drawing, I mean, you're improvising. But the horn arrangements or all the other arrangements, string arrangements, whatever they are, they're written out in full. So in that case, or if you're, let's say, Duke Ellington, if you're in that band, everything's written out, and the conductor is just like a conductor in classical music. There's no difference. But traditionally speaking, in jazz notation, you have a head, meaning the melody, written out as a single line. And therefore, if you have a single line, it's easier to read a C than to read a B sharp. And then you have all the chords named by just names. We can do that as well. That's a really, really good exercise. Let me just write this out. So we have the D, we have the B sharp, in place. Scale to V1 would be, say, for instance, I'm just going to put it up here because that teaches us a little bit more about reading ledger lines up there, right? And then the A would go in here. So that's my German augmented sixth chord. What if I was a jazz guy and I said, hokum, you know, there's no B sharp. That's complete. That's just, you know, white classical music freaks who do it that way, and that's complete rubbish and all that. And I understand that very well. And so what would I call this? Let's say I don't call it a German augmented sixth chord in the key of F sharp. What if I called it something else? I would actually call it D7. Because here's a D. Let me write it up for you so you can see it. Right, here's a D. That's an F sharp. Here's an A, and there is correct a C. That's a D dominant 7 chord, or in abbreviated notation, just D7. Right? I understand that very well. And in this case, this chord goes to G and not to F sharp. Right? This was the trick that John Coltrane played with giant steps, because you can access two keys that are a half step apart and thereby go forward in giant steps in the circle of fifth. That's what that's all about. So we're not just learning classical music theory here, we're learning exactly how advanced bebop works too. And for much the same reasons. That's a topic that Professor Carlos and I will explore hopefully together. There's a symposium on racial reconciliation, that group that is hosting that on April 1, 1st of April. It's not an April Fool's thing, but I proposed a sort of seminar where I explained, because this is stuff that's going on in music, where music reflects its time. It was true for Beethoven, who lived at a very revolutionary time where things were thrown into question. You know, your path in life, and you know, how much in control of your destiny are you really, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It will be more clear as we move forward, I hope. And the same is true for John Coltrane, living as he did at the height of the civil rights movement in the 1950s, where all of a sudden these expectations of this chord here that sounds exactly like a dominant 7 chord, but that's going to go to G, it's going to go to F sharp, major or minor. You don't even know that, because it's like having the proverbial rug pulled out from underneath you as a listener. And that this sort of discombobulation for the expectations that are not met but replaced with something that was unexpected. That's what that music is all about. And that's why these harmonies are so key to understanding what role art had in society at various points in time. It was certainly true in the 1950s. It was also true in the time right after the French Revolution. Okay? So that's what I would call that one. If I were to not call it German Messies, but I'll call it D7, right? Because that's what it is. It sounds like a D7 chord. Just play a D7 chord. And then the resolution, whether you're going to F sharp or you're going to G, that will reveal whether it's one or the other. But this is the interesting stuff about, I think, or one of the, I think a lot of things are interesting about music theory, that you can not just hold an opinion about, oh, I think there's a tendency to do that. I can't explain it, but I just think there is, right? Now you can actually say, this music reflects our time in the following way, right? It's like, you know, you probably have heard and sometimes participated in discussions about food, for instance. That's a controversial topic. You can't say anything about it because somebody says, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. What if you actually had a conversation about food with somebody who actually understood metabolism, right? Then all of a sudden we say, all these things out there that bacon is good for you or whatever, you know, because they contain a lot of carbohydrates, you know, that's complete, you know, crock. And you can, if you know your stuff, you can sort of debunk this thing. It's all about having the power of knowledge, right? Not that that accounts for much these days, but but it's good to have nevertheless. Okay, I think we did F sharp. So D flat. This is evil, isn't it? Swiss augmented sixth chord and key of D flat. Wow, no, that's really tough. But good old scale degree 1, we can always rely on that. I'm going to put that in and say, okay, now I got my orientation down. Swiss augmented. Okay, let me nail that other one because it's sort of easier to navigate from 1, right? Scale degree 2 would be E flat. Okay, so a whole step up from D flat. I know that. D flat. This one would be E flat, right? And if it was raised 2, I would remove the flat, right? At flat 3, now I have to have the same as E, but spelled as an F, right? You see that? And so it's simple because all you have to do is to do that. What is a minor third up from D? Well, that's F, right? What is a minor third up from D flat then? Because we're not really operating with D flat minor. I know you probably do in the gospel church. You probably call it D flat minor. There's a very good reason why that's not really a key as such, you know, because you would have to have 8 flats, right? The 1 flat that is in D minor, and then lower all the notes by a half step. All the 7 notes in that scale will be lowered by a half step. So you have 8 flats as opposed to C sharp minor, which is a key, and that has 4 sharps. So it's easier to navigate that. Okay, we now know that this one here has to be an F flat, right? You see how I'm working this out? Then I'm just going to go upwards here, really comparing it to D and not to D flat. Scale that we find in D is A. And in D flat, it will be A flat. Yeah? A half step up would be some type of B, but it's the type of B that is a half step up from A flat. So it would be some type of B that is the same key on the piano as an A. That'll be B flat with an extra flat, right? Because 2 half steps down from B would be A. And that is a half step above A flat. I know this is because this is a rubbish key, right? And I understand that. But I can tell you there's so many times where I work with gospel musicians and they land on a C sharp minor triad and they say that's B flat minor, right? So this is a situation that because in the tradition of some gospel churches, not all of them, flat keys or minor modes would be named for flat keys, like G flat minor, for instance, right? Which is the same as F sharp minor, but it will be very consistent. And I understand the logic behind it. It's just very impractical if you're working like a choral arrangement. It's complicated because you'll have to contend with this one here, with a B double flat and not an A natural, which you would have had in C sharp major minor. Okay, so yeah, do you understand what I mean by that? I'll take that as a yes. The leading tone to A flat is G natural, right? And that goes in. Oh, sorry, that goes in the top part. Now you don't particularly need the natural here, but it just looks good from there. And flat 6 is, let's say here, right? Unfortunately, there is no single symbol for a double flat. Like a double sharp is an X, but a double flat is just a double flat. I'm sorry, I didn't make it up, but that's just what we have. Okay, so that's basically the homework. I think what I'd like to do is just to say, if you haven't done this, most of you have actually, and you do get a little check mark, but the important thing is that you can do it, not that you submitted X number of homework assignments and I give you some letter name or whatever, or some percentile, whatever. That's all that's fine, but I will announce when homework assignments or exams are graded, because you deserve fair warning. Right now, we're just learning it, and it's more important, even if you're making mistakes, that you're comfortable sort of doing the homework and also comfortable doing mistakes, because that's part of learning. I firmly believe that. The method to working this out is the all-important thing. That's what it's all about. Okay, so I just want to say, if you didn't complete some of this, do it for next week, and there's no new homework assignment. Next week, we'll start to part right with this stuff. Okay?
Okay.
So take a chill pill this week, and be prepared to take a step forward next week.
Gotcha.
Good? Okay. Great, guys. We will see you next week.
Bye.